Welcome to the afternoon session, and we start with the ECGI Working Paper Prize Awards. Now, before I give the floor to Amir Licht, who is the editor of the Law Prize series, let me say two things. One is a word about the governance and the relationship between ECGI and GCGC, because what are we doing here giving out ECGI Working Paper Prizes? And then the second thing, let me say something about the series in general and the role of the two editors and the series more globally. And I'll talk about you as well, Tom, okay, just to put you on the spot here. Okay, so first of all, the relationship between ECGI and GCGC. As many of you know, GCGC was the idea of Ron Gilson. Ron can't be with us today, but we are hopeful that he'll be with us in New Haven in 2 years from now. So it was Ron's idea, and the way it was set up is it's set up as ECGI is the fund promoter of GCGC, but GCGC is its own association with its own board and its own governance. And the conference chair is this year Claudio Stodio. Next year it's going to be Umakant. And they are the boss of the program. So ECGI suggested to the boss, that's Claudia, whether we could give out, okay, whether she would give us an hour to give out the ECGI Working Paper Prizes. And she generously agreed to that. Well, okay, so it's an experiment. Please give us feedback afterwards whether you think it's a good idea that next year, because the plan is to do this again next year, it's a good idea to give out these working paper prizes. Now, the second point is, what are these working papers about? So ECGI is a membership organization, and the core of the organization are really the research members. So ECGI does not peer select research papers, but it peer review appoints people. And the assumption is if you're an ECGI research member, you produce good papers. And then when the paper goes into the series, all sorts of wondrous things happen. There's Elaine and her team who put it on LinkedIn and write blogs about it and so forth. And then if Tom Gosling really likes the paper, he calls you up and says, could I have a chat with you? Now, of course, the question is, since Tom is now in the paper production business himself, okay, the question I asked him, Tom, who's going to talk to you about your own paper you're going to present later on this afternoon? And we're debating whether he's going to have a conversation with himself or not, okay? So anyway, so to come to the serious part again, now, of course, some years ago, we had advice that all good organizations need a tagline. So the tagline we came up with is leading research with global impact. But I think given the times we live in, we might actually add two words, if not officially, but unofficially, leading independent open access research. So in order to be independent, as we now know, it matters how you're financed. And just a word of thanks. So together with the board, so Jopana is here, Luca, Genevieve was here, the board decided about 2 years ago to have a push to have more of the research funded by the research members. And we made an appeal to the research member collective, Cabal, to actually sign up their own universities, and many have done this. And now also we've asked people to contribute a small, if their university doesn't contribute financially, to contribute themselves, and this is making a huge difference, because essentially ECGI is now self-funding, and it's also got a reserve, and we're continuing to build up that reserve. So I think we are in a pretty strong position to be independent. Also, Belgium is a very dysfunctional country, so there's no chance of any takeover whatsoever. Is this on video? Okay, it's a very nice country, you know, so okay, you know, very independent. Anyway, so, and the other piece, of course, is the open access. So we have a commitment to open access, and we are also, for GCGC, extremely grateful for people who give us money with no strings attached. And I'd just like to give a shout out for the Japan Exchange Group, because Japan Exchange Group has supported GCGC from the very beginning, and you've been a loyal supporter of GCGC for so many years, so I'd just like a loud round of applause for JPX. Now then, we also have sponsors for the prize. So we have for the two series, we actually have a sponsor. I'll come to you in a second. Now, my last word is, I'll finally come to you, Amir, okay, but now it's coming into Nadia. So we also have editors for the series. Now, editor might be the wrong word, maybe, because they actually don't select the papers, but they are content moderators, okay? So, it's free writing in teams sometimes, Holmstrom, 1982, so sometimes people sneak in papers that have nothing to do with corporate governance or might not even be research papers. So, no, because, you will not get past our content moderators, Nadia and Amir, okay? You will get a very nice email saying not appropriate, okay? Now, that's one of their jobs. By the way, they don't get paid, so, another thank you to both of you. The other thing they do is they select, together with their editorial boards, they select the papers for this prize, so that's very important, and I think the idea with having them presented, the two prizes, both being presented to the winners, but also giving the chance of the winners to say something at a place like GCGC, that's really what we are trying this year. So without further ado, I hand over to Amir, our editor content moderator, to hand out the Cleary Gottlieb Prize. And thank you again, Cleary Gottlieb, for sponsoring the prize. Amir.
Thank you. Thank you, Marco. I cannot compete with that. So my remarks went through 4 rounds of revision, and they boil down to thank yous. I mostly would like to thank the board members. These are Iris Chu, Genevieve here, Kate Judge, Martin Gelter, and Georg Ringe, who do the hard work. When the work gets hard, I rely on the board, and we do it together, including in the selection of the best paper for the year. This year, the work was particularly easy. It was a very quick process. We zoomed on Katja's paper, about which you'll say a few words. So beyond thanking the board members, I would like to extend, I think, our common thanks to Elaine, first and foremost, because the working of the board would have been impossible without Elaine's help and Susanna's help as well in whatever needs organization. Please. Please. In a moment, I would hand over the mic to Paolo Arenelli, who is the sponsor, or Cleary Gottlieb is in the shoes of Cleary Gottlieb. In the shoes of Cleary Gottlieb, who are the sponsors of the award. I wouldn't want to steal any of Katja's thunder or time, so I would just say that I do think it's an important paper, personally, and as representative of the board, because it addresses a difficult question that anyone who's just had a brush with their eye contemplates, which is how do we hold people responsible for things that they didn't do and cannot explain, and which is pretty much the situation. And I think Katja's paper, we all thought that Katja's paper does a significant job in the direction of explaining these difficult questions. So Katja, before Katja, Paolo, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce the winner of the Cleary Gottlieb Prize for the best paper in the 2025 working paper series, the law series. Cleary Gottlieb has been a proud sponsor of these papers and this prize for many years, and we are glad to support independent research by leading academics. Again, as Amir said, we don't want to steal time, so I will not take more of your time, but allow me to say just a few words. The paper by Katja tackles one of the most urgent questions in modern corporate governance, both for academics and practitioners. As Amir was saying, the question is how do we preserve accountability and legal integrity of when decisions by the board are shaped increasingly by artificial intelligence. That is a question both for academics and for practitioner lawyers. They don't want to lose their job because of AI, and they want to know what are the analyses that need to be carried out when decisions are supported or taken by artificial intelligence. Before leaving the floor to Katja, I would like to extend on behalf of Cleary Gottlieb an heartfelt thank you to the European Corporate Governance Institute for the fruitful collaboration we had over all these years. It's really a pleasure. And, the fact that we are in this particular moment, the fact that the European Corporate Governance Institute, with this wonderful job that you have been doing and that you will certainly continue to do, is bringing together leading scholars in one truly European, but looking around today in this cooperation with the Global Corporate Governance Colloquium, we would rather say a truly global organization that fosters dialogue across countries and continents. This has always been extremely important, but I would say that it's particularly important in the difficult times we are living today. So without any further ado, I leave the floor to Katja, and allow me to join me in congratulating her for winning the 2025 Cleary Gottlieb Prize.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you. It's lunchtime over. I don't have a dad joke, let alone a mom joke, and it's a theoretical paper. So I understand if you start leaving the room, but I hope it's not going to be as awful as you might suppose. Now, why did I write this paper, or why did I start this project, really, which, the paper is a Kickstarter for? I've been always interested in theories on decision-making, and how the law integrates those in sort of, at least as a minimum, an implicit assumption for its rulemaking. And so that's the background for the paper. So what I'll do in the next 10 minutes is I quickly give an overview on current corporate law along two axes. I'll talk a little bit about the implicit assumptions that rests on and why I think it's not going to work as well with integrating an AI. And then I will give you a bit of an overview on the ownership and trust, kind of a four-square matrix to conceptualize how that could work going forward. I'm not going to bore you with number one. This is a theory that basically all of AI shouldn't be used because you're abdicating board authority. I don't agree with that. Happy to talk about it. The only way in which this could make sense is a pure black box AI. In the paper, I say even for pure black box AI, i.e. something that's not going to explain to you what it's doing, it's not going to work, but I'll push this for fifth time back. Now, I've worked on Delaware and German corporate law, and I'm going to describe them quickly along those two kind of boxes, which later will turn into axes. Ownership and trust will start with trust. So the idea here, I think, is pretty clear. The principals trust the agent to make decisions in the interest of the company. Business judgment role is a clear explanation of that. And then trust levels vary. So business judgment role is the one where trust is high. And principals would like the agents to take on a lot of risk. Whereas if you think about a compliance decision, trust levels are low, right? Because you don't really want your managers or board members to take on a lot of legal risk. And this has nothing to do with trust in estates, right? In the same way as ownership has nothing to do with property law. So those are just words I'm using without saying something about ownership in a legal sense. So ownership is really about a concept which is going to be interesting when we talk about AI. Because again, a principal will of course accept that the agent needs help, needs outside help, is going to outsource stuff, and will evaluate unknowns, and that's his job. However, a principal will always, in the end, require the agent to ultimately take on full responsibility for decisions. So if this is the background, I have 2 quick slides on the implicit assumptions I feel that have been underlying the kind of current corporate law, both Delaware and German law. So that's 141E, which I think is really interesting because it talks about the board calling in experts from inside the company or outside the company, different duties depending on where they come from. And sort of similarly, German law has something that we call a plausibility check. So you call in an expert from the outside, but the board members are still required to kind of rethink and review what those experts said. So those are some of the assumptions, right? So usually if you call in an expert from outside, you're cognitively able to follow what this person says. You're able to ask that person for an explanation. There can be a critical discussion between you and the expert. There are plausibility checks possible, and you're often educated, I would assume, about the heuristics and biases. Now, one of the things I submit is this doesn't really work that way if we're integrating an AI. There's no real conversation in, the way what we think of as a conversation. Yes, you can kind of talk to ChatGPT, but it's something else than talking to a human person. It's pretty hard in most scenarios to estimate AI errors, both as to model and data. And then there's no traditional explanations, especially no causal reasoning, which I think really fascinating to be had from an AI. So if you compare human styles of reasoning, typically we start with a first principle and more or less deductively, step by step by step, you guys with your hypotheses, we've seen yesterday and today. That's how humans think. Whereas, of course, the AI is a pattern recognition machine, right? Working with inductive inferences, so it's a very different style of reasoning. Then there's the known challenges of encoding knowledge. They're working on so-called RAG machines, retrieval augmented generation. And then there's the challenges of biases. So there's well-known biases, Kahneman stuff, base rate neglect, conjunction fallacy, stuff like that. But there's also new heuristics and biases, which interestingly enough, the AI Act has already incorporated, called automation bias. So all those implicit assumptions, there's movement. And so what does that mean? What does that imply? For me, it implies, well, we need to rethink, does our traditional corporate law stuff work? My answer is going to be yes. But how do we need to reconceptualize it to figure out whether there's going to be a meaningful working cognitive cooperation between humans and AI. And so that's the matrix I've been talking about. So I've already explained to you, trust level would be really high, and I'm not talking about quantitatively measuring anything. It's really only a graphical demonstration of what I have in mind. So trust levels are highest in a business judgment situation, lowest in a pure compliance situation, somewhere in between, as we discussed last week at Bocconi, in a risk management situation, for instance, right? Ownership, highest if the board does it all by itself, lowest if it totally outsources to an AI, which is unexplainable. Right? So this is sort of the situation, and I think for me, the beauty of the matrix is that you can kind of move it. So no board decision is ever going to be only up there or only down there. Typically, a board decision has tons of elements, of course, right? And so my feeling is you move your specific decision you want to look at in those 4 squares and kind of get a feeling for what you should do or could do under a legal viewpoint to get a feeling for, is there going to be a lot of judicial scrutiny? Is there going to be very small judicial scrutiny, right? And to just give you 2 quick examples, I use AlphaFold, which is a really cool AI that predicts protein folding structures. Is that explainable? Not really. Do I care if I'm a drug developer to understand how AlphaFold came up with this? Well, only to the extent that I required to price the known unknowns and maybe also the unknown unknowns, right? But that's about it. So that's going to be up there. It's a business judgment if I'm going ahead with another drug or developing a new drug. It's pretty high on ownership if I have a reasonable way of pricing the unknown unknown that maybe AlphaFold got it wrong. Whereas, take an example for this one, I'm developing a new product. I want to roll it out across the world, and it's a risky product. So I might face liability in all the different countries I'm going to offer the product in. So I don't feel like having lawyers, and I'll ask an AI, and again, make it pretty theoretical, make it unexplainable. So that's going to be down here, right? It's a decision, a compliance decision where there's no trust of shareholders. Shareholders are not going to say, oh, just take the risk, it's going to be fun. And also, if you use a black box AI and you don't double check it, again, theoretical case, you'd be down there. So, of course, enormous judicial scrutiny, right? So that's what the matrix does, and I think I'll pretty much stop there. I have a couple of things on how to work out kind of in practice. So if you are a board, define the type of decision, embed the decision in your decision-making procedures, right? That's the 2 axes in what they work with, but I'll stop there.
Just moderation. Q&A. We have 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
AI.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Done.
So I asked this with a bit of hesitation because I'm certainly no AI expert, but I was using deep research on ChatGPT, and what I found interesting about it is that when you ask it a question, along the side it actually tells you the sources that it's going to, right? And I imagine that AI is going to eventually, or maybe even quickly, get to the point, you know, when you first used it, there was no sort of links to the sources that it was from, right? But now, you know, there's links to sources where it's from. And I don't think it would be that much of a step to get sort of a, you know, a more detailed account of getting transparency. So I'm just wondering what you think in terms of, you know, you were talking about this being set up around the concept of it being a black box. And I'm just wondering how long is the box going to be black for, right? I would argue that even now it's not nearly, you know, it's become a bit more transparent. And in the future, will you be able to request, for instance, you know, more about the sources, more about the way that it's thought, and how that would interact with your current paradigm, which I think is terrific and super fascinating. Yeah.
So the black box is really, I have both probably microphones, right? I don't need that, I guess. The term black box has something else in mind. It doesn't have sources and stuff in mind. What it has in mind is, and I'm sure most of you will have seen that, for an AI, you distinguish between the input factors and the output factors and what's in between. And so The black box AI makes it complicated with the in-between. It has the so-called very many layers, which is roughly thinking about the human brain works. And so black box for us means there's no way, not even for the coolest kind of IT scientist, to explain to you why a certain input triggered a certain output, right? So that's where it comes from, the black box AI term. And it's been developed in the area of machine learning. And so if you now translate that thinking, maybe I'll give you an example. I did a lot of work on credit scoring. So classic example is credit scoring based on, let's say, 6 or 10 or 12 variables, right? What FICO does in the US. That you could make pretty well explainable because you have the variables, you can assign the weights, you see it, you get the output. That would be an explainable AI. Now, in the US, there's a couple of fintech outfits that have started credit scoring based on big data. So they take whatever there is to be found out about you, right? Like where do you work out, what music do you listen to, I don't know, do you often recharge your phone, stuff like that. And so the larger the input factors that go into the AI, the more it's gonna be complicated, and it's not gonna be easy to link variables to weights and then explain what's gonna be the outcome. And this has led to those called black box AIs, where they still produce kind of a constant and an output with a really high predictive force. And even if you give you the source, even if they said, oh, we looked at the entire internet and that's my source, that's not going to be what helps you. But I think I like your question a lot because of the term of explaining what it does. And because in the AI Act and also more generally in this area of research, there's a lot of hype around explainability. And then again, it's interesting, what does explainability mean? Because explainability for an IT scholar usually is something else than explainability for a board member would be. And an IT scholar, if they talk about explainability, what they do is they take the input and the output I've just described. They feed this into a second AI, which is going to create a model trained on the input-output pairs. And in that way, it's going to explain to you what the original black box model does, right? That's one way of doing it. It's called CHAP values based on game theory, really. And another way is counterfactual explanations. So easy for the credit scoring example, I get my credit score, and then I'm like, oh, so what if I'm a man? What if I'm older? What if I'm younger? And then it spits out different stuff, right? So these are types of explanations that IT scholars are trying to produce. Some of them might be interesting for board members, but they're looking for something very different than what the board member would be interested in, right? So, yeah.
So I'm thinking of a specific scenario in M&A. The fairness opinion that the board relies upon when when it approves a deal. So you could go to Goldman Sachs and pay $1 zillion for this, or you could go to ChatGPT or whatever. And so, which would cost less.
Yeah. Unless there's litigation afterwards.
So where does it fall into your boxes?
Mm-hmm. Good example. In the paper, I have an IPO example, which is sort of similar, right? An IPO pricing example.
IPO is different.
Yeah, no, but I'm just in terms of we need to look at prices and we need to be able to understand prices.
Right.
So I would say it's somewhere in the middle, right? Because it has a compliance component and it also has a business judgment component. And the question is, how would the board go about to make it its own? Right? That's what I'm interested in understanding. The more, if it really only says to ChatGPT, go ahead, we're going to, take what you spit out and we're going to use it. Then you would be down there in terms of ownership. But the more, that's what I was suggesting on the second slide, the more you make it your own, that is what I think that's the way in which we need to reconceptualize corporate law. You need to be able to move as far as you can on the ownership axis. You're probably, for instance, are not going to use ChatGPT. Probably you're going to use a different type of foundation model, and you're going to develop a good sense of what type of proprietary data you're going to feed in, and maybe also different type of data of similar situations. So already more ownership, because you understand better what the data does. Same for the model. More ownership, the better you understand what the model can really do.
I mean, you're kind of fighting the question a bit. What I really mean
Yeah.
to say is, you know, I don't know if we're going to use literally ChatGPT, but somebody is going to come up with a model of fairness opinion, right? And you know, Goldman Sachs may actually produce the model, right? But the point is, that's all you get is you put the figures in the model and it spits out an answer. So it's a bespoke Goldman Sachs devised model on, you know, fairness, as opposed to, you know, having their associates run around for, you know, 1,000 hours, whatever. So the question is, where would that fit in your box?
Well, yeah.
It's an automated assessment based on a sophisticated version of whatever, but on the other hand, there's no way to interrogate it except to maybe rely on the fact that Goldman Sachs is selling this thing and other firms have used the same thing. So is the fact that it's in common use, for example, is that a sufficient basis for a board to get into, you know, the low judicial review box, the 144E box? I mean, you know, what are the preconditions in which AI, in effect, could be relied upon conclusively by a board for a legally required determination? Sorry.
Right.
Thanks. Just a quick question. It's more relating to, Jeff talked about M&A, so I'm moving to the securities side of things. So I was wondering, to what extent do issues like black box, explainability, extend to shareholders? So in the scheme of things, how much of this needs to be disclosed to shareholders? How much should shareholders, this is material information. How is the decision-making process being carried out by the directors is something that needs to be disclosed to shareholders. So how do we look at it from that perspective? I'm not sure if regimes around the world are really talking about this in great detail from a specific securities perspective, but the materiality question still might take this into account.
Do you want to collect, because we don't have time?
Yeah, we have one. I can take one more question. Alon had his hand up, you know, all the time. So
I think I'm sort of confused, and I think Jeff sort of was raising similar issues. Also, the first question. I mean, it seems that there's a tension between prediction and causality. And I think the tension here is that black box can give you amazing predictive abilities, and you have no clue what the model is. And you will never know, because size cubed times square root of your whatever, you can't interpret. So if you go to Goldman will be able to tell you why the price is the price, because they'll give you the model.
Yeah.
And so my question is, what is it the board is expected to do? Because if it's about prediction, then I can take all of their information from the time they're hired, fit it into ChatGPT, and basically endow ChatGPT with all their knowledge. And then just say, if the board is just about prediction, ChatGPT is my answer. It's very cheap. Yeah. Unless you want them to do some sort of explanation, to kind of say, here's the way my, here's how it works. But I'm starting to understand, what are the situations in which they need a model, as opposed to just great prediction?
So, do you want me to answer still, or? Yeah. Very briefly. Okay. So very briefly on both of your points. Well, that is my answer. That needs to be both often. It depends on what we're talking about. I'll be talking about a fairness opinion. I'll be talking about the SOX rule where you need to sign, for instance, if you're a CFO. So it very much depends on what type of decision we're looking at. And the decision might be of the AlphaFold kind, so that there's very little legal rule on it, so that I can easily jump up to the upper right-hand corner, because the AI just gives me a bit of a hint, and then I work with my usual board stuff. The more there is legal rules on it, the more I will be required, and then it's not only going to be about prediction. Then the corporate law, at least as it is today, requires you to do more than only rely on a prediction you don't understand. And as I say, it depends on the type of decision, right? There might be pure business judgment decisions where you can do that. But there might be more compliance-oriented decisions where the law requires to do more. And then the question is, what is more? How do we get towards explainability? How do we get towards double checks? And how do we get towards understanding what the model does, what our data does, et cetera. So it sounds sort of unsatisfying, but it's a question of individual cases. So there's not one answer to tell you this is what we're always going to do. It's a question of individual cases where you need to understand what data do we have, what model can we use, how well is it really the Goldman Sachs model everybody uses, although it's not explainable, or is it this sort of random model somebody came up with? So, and I mean, as a footnote, it's also going to be a question of how to understand duties of care in a European context as opposed to duties of care where everybody kind of opts out of after Smith Van Gorkum in the US. So in the US, a lot of litigation is going to revolve around duties of loyalty, which makes it adds a complexity on top of everything, which makes it sort of easier in the European context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katja. And another round of applause. Thank you.